Yeah, I thought it would be fun to just kind of have it, you know, deciding between things. This could be kind of a cool feature, but it wasn't enough.
10 to 15
minutes. Not about the period to jump to pick the fact that it's mine. That's no problem.
Like Google Cardboard is good. That's what
Right.
so others things are just like fancier and like plastic and stuff.
Yeah, none of it really. I mean, I was more looking at the phones, just the video quality of the phones. No phone out is good enough to really matter. And they're better phones, but no phone is actually going to be high enough quality to be like, okay, this is.
You know, you can still see what like movies and pixels.
That's what everyone's saying online. So,
With the Vive, you have to like really focus to be able to like.
So you're seeing what we can do with the Vive.
So it's like when you're in the middle of the action, like playing a game, like you're 100% fully into it, and then when you take off the headset, you're like. It's pretty chill.
It is cool. But most of the stuff I've seen, it's
So
like,
it's Microsoft?
I know I'm shooting stuff or
Yeah.
I'm like driving something or whatever, and it's sort of like more immersive when full when it comes to the environment. But like gameplay wise,
Yeah.
that's existed forever.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing. They need more games. They'll come, but that like really make VR awesome. Like, it's not just a game ported from non-VR to VR.
It seems like for some reason it's
Monday, March 6th from...
Yeah.
literally lasts less than 5 minutes.
Really?
It's super, super short. You're just like saying, like, X-ray and R2D2 says these things, and then takes off. And you're like,
Yeah,
6 gigabits.
And then,
Anyway, there's more to it
what's
than
the
that.
topic?
I don't do development, so I don't
I mean,
know.
you'll probably talk more about it.
I saw something really interesting that they were grabbing like figurines for like model shops.
Yeah.
For the ones that they have to scan and then blow them up and put them in like 3D search.
Right.
So I think they're like just trying to figure things out like that. And then there was another one where they had like a special kind of camera. They just walk you outside, like along the wall, just hold it, and then whatever was there would like be inside of the VR world.
Right after the
Like it would pick up kind of like it was both a regular camera, so it would pick up textures, but it was also depth.
This was actually
See
really
like the shape
fun.
of
They
everything.
talk about ridiculous
It would actually be
I
cool.
think there's gonna be like better.
There's one.
It would be cool to just do like virtual vacations. Like if you could do something like float up Rome, right? And like walk around and sort of, it's not the real thing, but
And what do we
kind
call
of
it?
experience like going to the Coliseum or something. You know, maybe it could be like 80% of the experience or whatever. Or you could go somewhere where
And this is not South Official,
I've been
right?
to. Like, you don't want to go to Iraq. It would be cool to see some of the stuff there. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So like if you could do something in that manner, that could be pretty cool.
Something for like for people to like understand like sort of because somebody can like tell you something's over there. I think like not necessarily like
Sure, there's definitely
this can be
like
like a bridge between those things where it's you kind of like
You don't have to
understand
make video, you
okay,
just do
like this is
audio.
like how people this is how the culture is. Obviously it's not gonna be the same as getting actually done.
right. It's still pretty cool.
Something actually.
Yeah, I mean certainly if you
I'm
go
definitely going to say when I
little
think
things
about
like
it,
getting
it's like
like
it's really hard.
going to restaurants, getting on the public transportation, doing all of these things that are cool there.
Yeah.
That's definitely a big part of the experience. But like, you know, it's gonna be a while before I can go. I'm probably never gonna get to go everywhere I want to go before I die. But you know, get to go to all these places. Like, it would be cool to kind of check it out. Yeah, some sort of yeah, for sure. You're like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you do like safari or iron chasing, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna die.
Yeah,
But,
she wants to do it. She emailed us, and so I go through it.
I didn't know I was into this.
Right.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Need to be chased by rhinos.
Yeah, honestly, it doesn't.
From Houston originally.
Here's the thing. Yeah, we already have it figured out. I'm not gonna.
So
I don't want to put anything up there about it, but like, I just want to reinforce what our meetup group. Find out about you.
Venezuela.
Alright, I just want to make sure I know.
Years. Just got here.
So
Also,
population
what brought you here to Austin?
Honestly, like,
percent of Texas versus the rest of Texas.
And then this whole scene just like.
I'm fine with the weather here. I mean, I'm a native Texan, so the hot weather doesn't bother me. And when I get this kind of stuff in February, it's totally worth it because you said you lived in Canada. Well, I don't think I should ever live there just I hate cold weather.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I
Canada's
don't know winter time or fall. It's just
right.
Oh, yeah?
They're like, where in Canada did you live?
Vancouver.
Okay. Vancouver is really pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there, and my wife works for Electronic Arts, and so she does stuff with servers basically, but she works with FIFA. They're based out of Vancouver.
I have a friend who worked on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think he was doing farming stuff.
Have you ever been? 2%.
So this is where I'll talk about.
I almost
Yeah,
think
kind of.
The Vancouver campus is big. I don't know how big it is compared to all the other ones, but it is a big campus. There's some pictures. A football field or something set up. It's pretty.
Is that
Yeah.
different than
No, she lives in Austin.
Oh, okay.
She just, FIFA's, yeah, so she primarily works with FIFA,
how many people are
but they're a branch which is basically analyzing allocation data. So there's how many servers you're using, how much money you cost.
I have a friend who's
We need all these servers, how do we attribute the money from to another, so she works specifically with FIFA. She does some other stuff too, but FIFA is yeah, sure, yeah, totally.
lights on the back?
Yeah, something like that. She works there, so I think it seems like they're pretty serious about making sure everyone has a pretty good online overhead enough servers, even being kind of overloaded on capacity, just to make sure that they can take care of any like perks that come in for whatever reason. So, and I think
But you guys are.
the tricky part is when, like before anything is launched, figuring out what the right amount of servers are to have and where all the servers need to be and stuff. How many copies we're going to sell.
All right, welcome everybody. This is the intro to the Austin startup scene, and we are gonna be, this is a special edition that's gonna be focused on EdTech, which means I'm gonna give a kind of abbreviated version of the normal intro to the Austin startup scene, and then Sean Duffy is going to give another 15 minutes or so specifically on the EdTech scene. And then Scott is gonna join us for the AMA and the Q&A after. So it'll be like the normal one, but with just more of a focus there. And this is something that we do every month, so other months you can come back, and there's ones that are just focused on the Austin startup scene. We're doing one during South by Southwest that's focused on the VR startup scene in Austin. Sometimes there's ones on the hardware scene or other things like that too. So first, a little bit about all of you. So who here went on the tour today? Most of you, okay, good. So you know about Capital Factory, we won't talk about that. Who went to UT? Not that many. All right. Who recently moved here? Maybe half. Who was born here? 2? That's pretty good. There's not that many people usually that were born here. Who's been to South by Southwest before? A lot of you. That's actually a lot. And who's going there in a month? You have badges? No? You don't need a badge. All right, who's looking for a job? Got a couple? I don't know what that means. I'm only looking for a good job. Who's looking for investors? They're not the same thing. Okay. And who's the founder of startup? Cool. Great. Well, what we're going to talk about today, although again I may go fast through some of these parts, is what's so special about Austin. A quick history lesson, a little bit of what got us here, basics of how you keep in touch with what's going on and know what's happening, and then some of the questions that I get asked the most, like how to find a co-founder, how to find a job at a startup, and how do you find all the local investors. Then we'll jump from there to Sean talking about specifically the EdTech scene, and then we'll go into the Ask Me Anything, which is Q&A with all of us. So this wraps around. It usually takes about a little longer than an hour, and then there's a happy hour in the kitchen next door, and so we usually all walk over there because usually people have questions afterwards that they want to come ask us individually, and so we can do that. However, I will say that almost every single question that someone comes up and asks me individually and is like, oh, I didn't want to ask this in front of everybody, but something was a really good question they should have asked in front of everybody. So I would encourage you to just ask them all in front of everybody. So so we do this regular event. The first Tuesday of the month is just focused on how to meet investors, and afterwards there's a happy hour for startups that are fundraising and investors, like angel investors. So the way both of these, this one that we're doing today and that one both work, there's the AMA part, which you might just come to once, or you might come back to because there's usually different people besides me up here answering questions. And then there's the happy hour part, where if you're currently fundraising or you're still new to Austin and want to meet people or looking for a job, those are things you probably want to come back to every month for a while you're doing all that. So the second Tuesday, we do a session on how to become a mentor, and so that's Tuesday mornings. We do a new thing we're doing this year is if anyone is pitching at South by Southwest coming up or at any other event outside of Austin where you're an Austin startup kind of going out and representing, we a lot of what we do, well, we do a lot of things, but we spend a lot of time helping startups with their pitches and working on their pitches for demo days and events. We've done a lot of that, and so one of the things that we want to start doing this year is really just helping anybody from Austin that's going out to pitch and making sure they kind of can look their best as they go represent themselves and represent Austin. And so if you know anybody that's doing that, if you guys are having a kind of pitch event coming up, reach out to us about that. This is the third Tuesday, which is the intro to the Austin startup scene, and then the new to Austin happy hour afterwards. And then another event that we do that's open to the public is called Epic Office Hours. And this is something we do every month or two where we have a whole bunch of mentors at once in this room and the big room across the way, usually in a speed dating format where you can really quickly talk to a whole bunch of different mentors and get feedback on what you're working on. And it's a great way for you to meet a bunch of different people or maybe find your first investor or learn something or meet someone. And it's a great way for us to meet lots of you. And then we go ask all the mentors what all they thought and who the cool startups were. So that's another good event to look for.
Are these all member events, or is this?
Those are all public. That's all open to the public. So that list. And then, honestly, being a member here is more about like working here and getting an access card and then getting invited. There are there are a number of kind of members only things, and certainly like when the president comes or something, like that's like the members only visit. He's coming again next week too. But just kidding. But like with most things here are open to the public actually. Like every night when we leave here, there's going to be another meetup in here tonight, and there'll be another meetup over there, and then there'll be something happening on the weekend. And this weekend there was a big Navy hackathon here, and so most of the things that happen here are open to the public. Basically, the members get it during the day, and then everybody else takes over the rest of the time. So all the stuff that I'm going to go over here you can find online. I bet Sean will post his if we ask him to. The slides that I'm going through right now is this bit.ly link, ATX Startup Scene Slides. It's very creative and long. These all get recorded and streamed, so we're live right now, and there's a camera right there on the ceiling, and so that broadcasts it on YouTube, and they all get recorded. There's a reason. The reason you might go look at an old recording is because even though I give the same presentation every time, there's like different people answering the questions, and they often have really different perspectives, and that could be good for the startup scene one. It's really good for the investor one because there's like different VCs up here every time answering questions, and they get asked different questions. So that's all interesting to go look at. And then the meetup group for all of these events that I talked about is just atxstartupscene.com. Oh, and the blog post. So hopefully you got the link to this when you signed up because it's in it's in the description. But there's a blog post that's kind of the top 10 steps or 10 things to do to plug into the startup scene, and that goes over all the basics of kind of like follow these Twitter accounts and sign up for these meetup groups and sign up for this email list and go to this event and things like that you can go read, and you should. Most of you probably found out about this on social media, and it's awesome. We love having a nice full room like this, but that only happens because people all post about it. So my ask of you is that you find some useful tidbit that Sean or Scott or someone else says tonight, and tweet that out and share it, and maybe they'll write their Twitter handles up on the board too, and tell other people about it so they can come to these. So our story starts with Austin. We get to do all this because Austin's kicking ass and has been for like 20 years. This year or last year, everywhere you look, there's like top 10 lists saying about why it's great for this or for that. This is saying it's one of the best places to start a business, talking about why everyone's moving here from California. Indeed said if you're a software engineer, this is the best place to get a job as far as like your salary versus your cost of living. If you're a company hiring software engineers, it's the best place to hire software engineers as far as like bang for the buck that you get for engineers. It's really weird to be in the same place at the same time. And the Kauffman Foundation that does studies of all kinds of different startup cities and metrics and things like that has ranked Austin the #1 startup metro in the US for the past 2 years in a row. I think that means we're doing really well. I still think Silicon Valley is the #1 startup place, so I don't totally get how they do that. But we're still good. We're really good. Most other places wish they were like Austin. We're fortunate to be there. And Texas is doing really well. I mean, if you just take like Texas, being like Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston, like those 4 cities are kick-ass. They're, I think, 4 of the 11 largest cities in the country. And if Texas itself were a country, it'd be like the 12th largest country in the world. So owning Texas is pretty good. Here are a whole bunch of the upcoming big companies in Austin that might IPO in the next couple of years, who knows? Here are some of the upcoming ones. Data.world, that slide was already there, but they just announced a big round of funding today. They're up to like $32 million, which someone asked me today, and I think that might be true. I think that's probably like the most money any startup in Austin has ever raised that fast. Like $32 million in probably like less than 2 years. I think it's more than a year, maybe not. Really fast. So anyway, so they're doing really well. Favor, Hanger's a drone company that's really cool. Alchemy Labs is has the best-selling VR game on the market. Job simulator. Twyla is a new art model startup, and then WikiBuy is a really cool e-commerce startup. Anybody else that should be on there? Reliant that's the latest one that you probably put on there. They're a really cool company doing a new kind of drug test. Sorry, not drug test. Like medical test to tell if you have different kinds of problems like strep or the flu or things like that, and then can turn that into a prescription, which is getting it from the test to the prescription really fast is really cool. So how did Austin become a tech hub? Pretty much everybody I talk to comes back to this guy. His name is George Kosmetsky, and the convention center is named after him. No, it's not. Sorry, that was a mix-up. But anyway, yeah, George Kosmetsky, and he was the founder of Teledyne, which was a big national computer company, and so very successful businessman. And then got involved with the University of Texas, got involved with the Chamber of Commerce. He was really involved in economic development here in Austin. He helped start the IC Squared Institute at UT, which was also then started the Austin Technology Incubator, which was one of the first incubators in the country, and he did a whole bunch of other things. But in particular, the one thing that I would attribute to him and Bobby Inman and Pike Powers is they all worked together with a lot of other people to get that here, which is doesn't look like that quite anymore. I call it the I'm gonna forget the name. It was a big computer consortium. That's the CC, and basically it was this big government project with the private sector to go be more competitive with the Japanese in the 80s again in chip design and silicon. And Austin won the bid because of the work that all those other people did to bring that big development here, which brought this big investment and created this big center, which is now the West Pickle Research Center up near the Domain. And that really put Austin on the map and brought all these engineers here and really kind of made it a tech hub and a place where people were doing all these interesting things. And that was probably one of the first big things that somebody tried to do that made something happen that really changed the scene. And the next one was probably this. Is that gonna play? Let's see. Check my audio.
This is the story. Room over the pizza place at 315 Chestnut Street. The modest first floor bedroom in Tallinn, Estonia. And the dusty basement at 1406 35th Street. It is the story of the old dining room table at 25th and Hoffman Avenue, the southbound bus barreling down I-95, and the second floor above the strip mall. at Roble and El Camino.
This magic moment,
It is the story of where every great idea begins,
so different and so new.
where those with endless vision and an equal amount of audaciousness believed they had the power to do more, time and time again.
And made it happen.
At Dell, we're honored to be part of some of the world's great stories. Stories that began much the same way ours did, in a little dorm room, number 2713.
This magic moment.
So Dell was the next big thing. If that white building wasn't there, right there, you'd see one of the towers at UT where that dorm room is, where Michael Dell started Dell, and that really changed the landscape for Austin and really, really put it on the map. And when I moved here in 1999, this was a Dell town. That's what everybody knew it was. Austin was. That's where Dell was, and that's where all the people in tech worked. And then I think I just really like that song. But Dell's name is all over Austin. There's the Children's Hospital and the Jewish Community Center and the new medical school and so many different things. But in particular, he really helped make it a startup city, and he's always been a huge champion of entrepreneurs here in Austin and all over the world. And part of how he did that was just by creating this huge company that grew really fast, because that's part of what creates the startup ecosystem. And in other places where it's further along, they've had more and more of those things happening. And when a company like that grows that quickly, it does all kinds of things. They hire lots of people. People come in, they form teams, they have to scale a company really fast, and they learn a lot about growing a company and doing that. And in that process, they get to work with all these different people, and they get to know like who are the other really good people. And now they form teams of really good people that know how to get shit done together. And they interact with all these customers and partners, and so they develop all these relationships out in the marketplace. And they learn through that. They learn about problems that the company has, like what are the kinds of problems a big company has growing. And they learn about the problems their customers have. And through all that, that's kind of like the perfect primordial. And then with the liquidity event, when there's some kind of like big exit, everybody makes a lot of money. Like the people who founded the company make a lot of money, and the people who are the first employees make a lot of money, and even people who weren't the first employees, usually if it's a really, really big company, make a good amount of money. And that gives them the resources and the funding to go try things. It's like the perfect primordial goo to go start a new company, because you have teams of people that know how to do stuff, that know about problems, and have access to funding. And that's like perfect for going and starting a whole bunch more companies. And then the other great thing actually in that is even the people who didn't make a lot of money, the people that joined like a year before it all happened, but the person next to them made like $10 million. And they're like, man, like I'm as smart as that person, like I can do that. And they know that, so that like kind of inspires them, not just the money, but the whole thing, to go think, wow, this is possible, I can go do that, and they go try harder. There have been a lot of other examples of other companies here in Austin that have spun off many other businesses, Bizarre Voice, HomeAway, and many others along the way, Tivoli, Trilogy, but Dell was really kind of one of the iconic starts. Another thing is the University of Texas. Again, we'd see it if it weren't for that big white building right there, but it's just north of the Capitol. And it's one of the largest universities in the country. It has the largest graduating computer science class in the country. It's about 800 students. It's ranked, I think, I don't know, like it's in the top 10 of all the CS schools. Huge engineering school separately from that. You know, they'll all be computer programmers anyway too. And then lots of other, great business school, lots of other great things going on there. Lots of research happening there. So every great startup city has to have a great university that fuels it, and we're really lucky to have UT Austin here. And I teach a course there that's like a mini capital factory for students with startups called Longhorn Startup, and this is a little short video about that.
Longhorn Startup is designed to give student entrepreneurs the opportunity to work on their startup while they're in school and get real course credit for graduation. I'm a biology major.
I'm an MBA student and also earning my master's in advertising.
I'm studying electrical engineering.
I'm a junior film major and computer science minor. We brought in some incredible speakers to meet with our students, like Michael Dell and Brett Hurt and Mark Cuban. We have a lot of great presenters come.
The speakers are really fantastic.
When you've got a startup that's real, it's time to get involved in the lab. And the lab takes the seminar to a whole new level by giving you a bunch more credit, connecting you with local mentors, and giving you lots of time to work on your startup with your peers. I wanted to get some real-world business experience before I graduated.
When I signed up for the class, I had to start defending my idea and my business model right then.
In addition to getting time to work on their startup, they get matched up with local entrepreneur mentors that work with them to improve their pitch, to focus them in the right direction, and to help them get it pointed towards funding and acceleration.
A lot of the acceleration that we've had so far wouldn't have been possible without this class.
We've had some like the greatest mentors.
I mean, the access to folks like Josh and Bob and Ben Dyer and just the entire mentor network.
They're always so knowledgeable and so helpful, and always willing to give us so much support that I think not only has been invaluable, it's just been fun.
This class has linked me with a mentor that has just become an angel to us.
And it's always been a fun experience just because they're also fun people. And you get to talk to those people and ask them questions and kind of get a glimpse into how successful people made it to where they are.
Get this kind of insider knowledge, learning what it means to make a company, to make a startup work.
There are a lot of great resources on campus for student entrepreneurs, but it's also great for them to be able to get off campus and go to Capital Factory, where they're surrounded by other real entrepreneurs that are working on their startups and learning from each other.
I'm so pleased to have Capital Factory.
It's such a great place. That's where we meet up with some of our mentors.
It's a beautiful place to work, and it's a hub of entrepreneurship in Austin.
You know, I started my first company when I was in college, but we didn't have any of these kinds of support structures. We had an entrepreneurial center, we had business courses, but nothing like this that could give me time and credit to actually work on my startup in school and learn from all the great resources that the university has to offer.
I've wanted to be in this class since it started.
This is what I came here to do. Build a startup and take it to the next level.
This class has been amazing.
I love it.
So that's Longhorn Startup, and our demo day is, I think, May 4th coming up, where you'll see the startups present. If there's anything else, anyone in particular you need to know at UT, it's this guy. His name's Bob Metcalf, and he's been in Austin now for 5 or 6 years at the University of Texas. He was first a researcher at Xerox PARC and invented Ethernet, which was basically plugged some of the first computers together to form the internet. And because of that, started a company called 3Com, which was eventually bought by HP for a couple $2 billion. And he has had many other careers since then. He helped, was like a publisher of a big, like the TechCrunch of the, I don't know, the 80s or whatever. And he was a VC at Polaris. And now he is the professor of innovation at Cockle Engineering School, although he really promotes entrepreneurship across the university. And he is awesome. He is really active and around and attending lots of things, and you'll see him places, and he's totally accessible. He loves, he's super encouraging and nice, and you should go talk to him and ask him questions, and I think you'll be really surprised. I would have normally thought somebody that successful would be really intimidating or hard to talk to, and he's awesome. He's really great to talk to. And his whole mission here is to help promote startups and grow them here in Austin, and we're really lucky to have him here. But in particular, he's at UT Austin. And then another thing is to know at UT is the new medical school. That's the Dean Clay Johnson in the lab coat. And the new medical school is really, it's great for Austin in a whole bunch of ways, but in particular it's great because it means more digital health, more health tech and other things like that happening here in Austin, which was already a lot of it happening, but that's just gonna really reinforce it and make even more happen, which is pretty great. And if there's anybody you want to know at the medical school, it's Melly Price. She also happens to be one of the directors here at Capital Factory, but she basically is in charge of all the technology innovation at the medical school. And so as they're reviewing both technologies that they would use or endorse or that they spin out internally or things like that, she's a really good person to know. And another great thing at UT is Texas Venture Labs. Texas Venture Labs is a graduate level program for UT business students that plugs them into startups, and it's not like really any other accelerator. Most accelerators, the company gets in and they're usually about helping them raise funding or something like that. This is the company gets in and they get a team of MBAs that then go work on projects for them, which might be helping them figure out funding or doing customer research or doing a whole bunch of other things that can help them out. So that's a really cool program. South by Southwest is coming up in just a couple weeks. It's now 2 weeks long, particularly because of EDU, because of the EdTech part of it that starts the week before Interactive, what we think of as the traditional kind of South by, I think. So really excited about that coming up, and we'll talk about that a lot more today, I'm sure. South by is great if you have a badge, which is what gets you access to all the official South by things, like the panels, where there's lots of speakers and some of the big official parties. But the cool thing about South by is that you can completely do South by and have just as much fun and like really get a huge experience out of it without having a badge or doing anything like that. There's just as many, if probably not more, things happening that are free and open to the public or private and invite only, and you have to know somebody or meet somebody, as there are things that require a badge. And really, it's the time when everybody in the world descends on Austin, particularly if you're in tech, and so you should really figure out how you can take advantage of it. You don't have to launch a product to take advantage of it. You want to think about how do you take advantage of all those people coming here. Who are the people coming here that you'd want to meet and that you'd want to connect with. And then in the fall, we have Austin Startup Week, which is a celebration of all the things that happen every week in Austin, because we have such a vibrant startup community, but really promoting the startup community itself at a time outside of South by Southwest, which isn't really about Austin, and really inviting people, particularly people that are interested in moving here or plugging into our community, to come during that time and be part of it. And one of the best things at South by and at Startup Week is the Startup Crawl, which is basically a huge party downtown where all the startups throw a party at once. And Capital Factory is kind of the center of it, where if you're too small to have your own party, you basically have tables and like a trade show here and downstairs at Capital Factory in the building. But it's happening at like a dozen places all around as well, and then there's a shuttle driving around taking you from place to place. So it's kind of like a bar crawl, but you go startup to startup, and you can actually get to meet. You'll obviously meet lots of people, but go inside different really cool companies, and lots of times the founders there are other people, and you maybe kind of get to see a side of it that you wouldn't normally get to see. Can all make that. That is March 13th, Monday. And it's traditionally been the biggest party at South by, but it's going to be bigger this year, I think, than ever, because it's actually normally the night before South by, like Thursday night, and now it's right in the middle of South by Interactive. So I think it's going to be bigger than ever. It should be really fun. This is Startup Games. Startup Games is another great event where the whole Austin startup community gets together to have a lot of fun playing ping pong and beer pong and liar's dice and Papa Shot and a bunch of other non-Olympic games, but doing it all as a big fundraiser for charity, and it's kind of a culture building event that's a lot of fun. A couple more quick things, and I want to make sure to get it over to Sean. What to read, who to follow, where to go. Sign up for the Startup Digest. It's a weekly email. It tells you everything that's going on. That's startupdigest.com/Austin. Follow me on Twitter. I'll retweet everybody else you need to follow. Go to austinstartups.com. That's a Medium publication that's got basically only publishes stuff from Austin entrepreneurs writing about stuff. So that's what Austin's talking about. And then on the Facebook group, Austin Startups is like the place online. There's a lot of people on there. This screenshot says 13,000 and a half. I'm sure there's more than that. But really, if you going to ask a question of the whole startup community, that's where you go post it. Another great thing is Open Coffee, and there's a big one coming up for South by Southwest, but that's a kind of just a networking event where so it's different, I think 2 mornings a month maybe, you can get together and there's a whole bunch of entrepreneurs at a coffee shop, and it was a lot of fun. And then if you want to get involved in what's happening with the local kind of civic engagement with City Hall and tech in government and tech in what's kind of being used to make our city work better, there's a group called the Austin Tech Alliance, which is another great way to plug into that. I think I'm going to skip over co-working, and we can get to that in the Q&A if you guys want to talk about that more. And find your dream job. There's a Facebook group called Capital Factory Jobs, and it's a really good place to post your resume. lots of people get connected to jobs through there. There's like 7,500 people in that group. There's another one called Austin Digital Jobs. It's not quite as startup specific, but has more people on it. That's another really good one to post it to. And then if you're, another way to like meet people and network is to go volunteer for things. And there's a group called Austin Tech Volunteers, and people post opportunities to volunteer at things like the Startup Crawl or South by Southwest or other events, and that's a great way to plug in and meet people too. So, VCs, everybody wants to know about money and VCs. Here are all the VCs. We don't have that many. Most of them are tech investors. They want to invest in they want to put a couple, like $500,000 to $2 or $3 million into a tech company, a software company. And then there's some exceptions. There's one company focused more on biotech. There's another one focused more on kind of like drinks and consumer packaged goods and things like that. But most of it's software tech, which some people love and some people will be disappointed about. And that is most of what I've got on my part. So I'm gonna jump over to Sean.
Cool.
You wanna take over the airplay?
Do you know?
7881.
I was asked that, and then I pretend like you're some kind of, you know something everybody else does. Cool. So, my name's Sean Duffy. I am the founder of and the lead organizer for the EdTech Austin Meetup, which has been here at Capital Factory for the last 4 years, because I started it and Josh said, hey, where are you guys hosting it? And I thought Capital Factory would be amazing, and it has been. So we've stayed here for 4 years. So I compiled this actually a couple of years ago. This is just kind of a high-level overview of everything education related that I can think of, and that includes demographics on the kind of people who live in this area, to organizations that are focusing on education, and then also funders and opportunities for you to get involved, either from an employee standpoint if you're looking to find a job, or partner organizations that might help what you're working on. And so I have this at the end of the slide deck as well. These were all of the different ways that I could think of for you to get in touch with us. But EdTech Austin, you can Google that and join the meetup, or follow us on Twitter. And yeah, we have a bunch of events coming up that you'll definitely want to get involved with if you're even the least bit interested in education. One of which is here tomorrow night, and it's like our biggest event of the year. I'll talk a little bit more about it later. So yeah, this deck was prepared in partnership with Education Pioneers, Austin Chamber of Commerce, and E3 Alliance. All three really great resources for those of you working in education. By the way, show of hands, how many of you are working with or for an education-focused organization? Okay. All right, cool. Everybody else, though, definitely interested in education, right? Yes.
Okay. That's good. So just
I should have asked that question too.
That's totally cool. So just to give you kind of an idea of the demographics here in Central Texas, we have kind of some interesting, we're kind of an interesting outlier in a lot of ways. Everybody knows this. I mean, just evidenced by Josh's question earlier about how many of you were born here. Most people in Austin and in Central Texas were born elsewhere. And then also, we kind of have a weird population versus the rest of Texas. Skews more white. We have a pretty comparable Hispanic population in Central Texas to the rest of the state. But it definitely is, it skews that way, which is really interesting if you're working in schools here. The divide down the middle of the city with I-35, we have a higher minority population on the east side, and then obviously a much larger white population on the west side of I-35. Really makes for some interesting inequities and inequalities. If you want to read more about those inequalities, I highly suggest you look into the recent debacle of how funding is allocated in the state of Texas, and basically how screwed Austin gets on our property taxes and how that's distributed to the rest of the state. It was ruled barely constitutional by the state Supreme Court, and the superintendent of schools for AISD
wrote a really strongly worded letter about why it needs to change. So really interesting stuff. I would highly recommend you check it out. It's important to know that the trend right now is that the majority of residents in Central Texas will be minority populations, and specifically Hispanic. We're trending in that direction, and it's something to be aware of if you're developing tools for use in K-12 education or even higher education. This is vitally important to note. We also have wide gaps in educational attainment. Again, that I-35 divide. There's a really great tool online you can check out. I think it was by Washington Post, where you can put in your zip code and it shows you educational attainment in your zip code. And it very clearly goes right along that I-35 line. So interesting to kind of see where the education, what the education spectrum is in this region. Same trend for income, and it's really important to note kind of where the income levels are based on educational attainment. There's a few other kind of demographic things in this deck that you can check out later, but I'm probably just going to skip through some of that. AISD is the largest district. The other major districts are Round Rock, Leander, and Pflugerville. We also have a link on here to a list of private schools in Central Texas. There's a ton of them, and they're all doing really differentiated, awesome things. So super cool to check that out. Beyond the private schools and K-12, we also have a ton of higher education institutions in town. Tomorrow night at the event that we're hosting, it's called the Education Innovation Showcase. Austin Community College will be there along with UT Systems and University of Texas, all talking about what they're doing in terms of innovation in the education space. But at one point or another, all of these folks have worked with us. St. Edward's has some really great entrepreneurship programs. They actually have David Altunian has a desk here, and I think other folks from the staff. So they're definitely as integrated into the ecosystem as many of the other universities in the area. So some really great advocacy and support organizations. These are folks who are working in and around the education space, and they're just great people to know about. So obviously the Chamber of Commerce and E3 Alliance. The Teachers Associations I have listed there, you can check those out. Raise Your Hand Texas does a lot for advocacy in the state. Texans for Education Reform, they're great. Ed Pioneers, I think I'll probably want to move them. They're like a leadership program for developing administrators in education. And then Computer Science for Texas, CS for TX, run by Hal Speed and Caroline Joyner. Really great organization focusing on providing more opportunities for computer science education in Texas, not just in Austin, but around the state. Help along with CS for TX is Teal's K-12. They work to pair professional programmers with schools to develop CS AP programs. AP Computer Science is a very under attended program and under offered. So it's really great work that they're doing. Code Interactive, teaching code to students and kind of bridging that gap, again, the professional world to the public education space. Hello World is a program that was started by a couple of folks, and they are doing after-school programming for students. Code to Career is another really great organization doing similar work to Teal's K-12, and I've put them in touch, and hopefully they can collaborate. Education First is a nonprofit scholarship organization. I'm actually the regional director for it, and we provide scholarships to low-income students in the Central Texas region. So actually, if you know anybody who is a senior in high school, who is first in their family to attend college, traditionally underrepresented in college, that scholarship is available, and I think we're giving out a $4,000 and a $2,000 scholarship. And then I think I had Ed Pioneers and CS for TX on there twice. So in addition to the funders and VCs that you should be looking at if you're looking to start an educational organization in town, some other folks you might think of would be Socratic Ventures, who just maybe started a seed round or started
Raising a fund.
They're raising a fund to help fund other education organizations. Dell Foundation, Roddick Foundation, is it HDK or KDK Harmon? KDK Harmon Foundation. SWAN, which is the Southwestern Angel Network, CTAN, all of those folks work with Capital Factory. And of course, Capital Factory is another great accelerator that can help fund your educational venture. So we made a list of all of the education companies that we know of in town. I'm not going to go through them, but a number of these folks have been in Capital Factory. They were part of the accelerator, have been funded by Capital Factory. Also just involved in events that we've done and have worked with us in some way, shape, or form. But these are all really great folks to check out and to learn more about what they're doing. Yeah, they're still technically Compass, but so there's everything from coding boot camps to big and small organizations. Pearson's on the list. What's that?
Student loan genius.
Oh yeah, they're not on there. They need to be on there. Another Capital Factory company. So funding for education is really interesting because it's been traditionally like undercapitalized compared to the other markets. That's what's really interesting right now, and the trends right now are for more deals spread out all over, and so no longer is the funding relegated to the coast, and we're seeing a lot more investment in companies in the flyover regions and Austin, which doesn't qualify as a flyover region. If you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend. This logo links to an article called Following EdTech Money. It's awesome. EdSearch does a fantastic job of cataloging like who's getting funded by whom, and so I highly recommend you check that out. We have some incubators and investors in Austin and nationally that are definitely worth considering. Scott and I started EdTech Action. We're actually just opening up a round for taking in incubator companies. Impact Lab is here as well. They do a really great job, and then Socratic Ventures is going to be looking to do more in that space. But the traditional large ones around the country, New Schools 4.0, Learn Capital, and Imagine K-12. There are a handful of others that are also working in that space and are super cool. All right, a couple of, obviously South by Southwest EDU is a great conference, and I will be there, Scott will be there, and we're doing lots of really cool stuff. So I'm going to share with you a couple of events and ways that you can get involved. We have our Education Innovation Showcase, which is here tomorrow night. There's going to be like 300 people there, 20 or 30 education companies who are going to have a booth. So it'll be kind of like a startup crawl, mostly in the main space, but then also Capital Factory has an awesome VR lab, and so they're going to be showcasing like educational tools through VR, and that'll be on the 5th floor. And then also Bleeding Edge Web is a web-focused meetup group, and they're focusing on education in the web here in the classroom tomorrow night as well. Thursday night, South by Southwest EDU is doing a community meetup at the Thinkery, and so that's also another great way to connect with education folks. During South by, we're partnering with iZone New York, the New York Department of Ed, to do a Shark Tank event where teachers pitch to other teachers. It's a really cool event. It's the 3rd or 4th year in a row they've done it, and it's a lot of fun. You should definitely check it out. We are also hosting a meetup here at Capital Factory, partnering with Microsoft, and so that's going to be Monday, March 6th. For all of these events, definitely sign up for EdTech Austin, and you'll get notifications about all of them. And then last, I just have a bunch of resources for you to check out. So if I missed anything, you've got some really great resources to go to. And then if you want to reach out, those are the ways to do it. All right.
And the link to the decks at the bottom there.
There you go.
Intro to EdTech Austin.
Cool.
Cool. All right. Well, Scott, do you want to come
Yeah, sure.
up?
Where do you want to sit?
You can stay there.
Cool.
So I didn't really introduce any of this. That intro, sorry. So I'm Josh Baer, and I'm the founder of Capital Factory, and I've started a couple tech companies. And according to PitchBook, I, as Capital Factory, is the most active investor in Texas since 2013. So we invest in a lot of startups. We write really small checks, right? We don't have the most money, but we do invest in a lot of startups, and we work with a lot of startups, and we do. And I think what makes us different than other investors is that, like, every investor says, like, we're a value-add investor, like we help you in other ways, but ours is not like we have like a list of like very specific deliverables of how we help and things we do and how we use this whole place to help the companies that we work with. And specifically, that's typically helping them meet co-founders, meet their first customers, hire their first employees, and find their first investors. And those are all really key things that make a big difference. And we basically created this big magnet that sucks in all those things and lets us give them to the startups. And we have two very distinguished leaders of the EdTech community here with us today. I'm gonna give them a little bit of an intro and let them introduce themselves because I can't do their whole bios for them. But what I can say is when there's anything EdTech going on in Austin, these two guys are there. Usually both of them, at least one of them. For a while I thought they were the same person, but they really spearheaded the whole EdTech community here in Austin and are plugged into it and know everything that's going on. And they're the people that I go to when I'm trying to evaluate something or figure something out around an EdTech company. And so they're the perfect people to be here for that today. So, Scott, you want to introduce a little background?
Scott Lipton.
You've done everything.
I've spent about 20 years in education as everything from a teacher to a high school principal to district level administrator. Started as an entrepreneur, started a small school here in Austin as well. Called Griffin School. That was very early in my career, but it's now entering its 21st year. So I did a lot of that and then entered into the startup scene. And sort of one thing I'll add about Capital Factory's investment is they invest in people and the scene. And really, when it's promoted as the center of gravity, it really is because they invite everyone in. And so it was about 3-4 years ago that we sort of got invited to start bringing this education stuff into Capital Factory, and like Sean mentioned before, we started a small company called EdTech Action, and really EdTech Action really goes out and really helps companies, really just serves as a mentor, connector. Like Sean mentioned, we're starting a new class. We have our first sort of official boot camp coming up for EdTech startups called ETA Academy, which will be starting in April. You certainly reach out to Sean or I to find out more information about that if you're interested or somebody is interested in starting a company in education. We do startup weekends for education. Part of my other world was also working for an EdTech startup, which was really a pretty amazing experience as well, and sort of getting on the ground floor and doing that. And then I do lots of consulting for schools and EdTech companies around everything from space design. I'm helping Josh's school he sends his kids to redesign their learning spaces right now, and doing that to curriculum design and software design, product design type stuff. So. So it's really great, and if y'all want to find anything else more about the education world, really in Central Texas or across the state, that's what we do, and really, and Sean's the real master, but I think one of the biggest thing we do is really make connections across the education scene and really try to solve some of the big problems in education through innovation and technology. And so we are I think we're named, in 2015, an education innovation cluster, which is a group of clusters of education innovation around the country. There's about a dozen of them, and we're really the only ones that are represented really across South Central United States. And so they say that Houston has one, but I haven't seen any evidence of that. So.
Similar to Scott, I have a background in education. I started out as a classroom teacher and actually worked under Scott at Del Valley High School, which is out by the airport. And it was around that time that I just moved down from Denver, and there really wasn't a community around EdTech. And so I love community, and I know Josh and Scott also feel the same way. That's pretty, I think, central to what works really well in Austin is just having connected people who are working on similar ideas. So starting EdTech Austin really was focused on that and helping bring those people together, give them a platform and an opportunity to collaborate to make education better in Central Texas. And I know that we've been able to do that, and I know there's a lot of great work left to do. And so, yeah, we're really excited to work with Capital Factory and work with all the awesome companies in Austin.
Great. So we've got, it's 5:24. So we've got, a little bit of like 15-20 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll head over to the food and beverage location.
The lounge.
Yes. Right out there. I'll start over there.
Sure. Well, great presentation. My name is Excel Lewis, and my question specific to EdTech is, are you laser focused on the K through 12, or do you span the gamut of post-secondary and higher education as well?
Definitely not. Well, I'll say two things. First of all, we're not specifically focused on K-12.
Okay.
I think it just so happens that a lot of the companies in Austin focus on K-12. And then, yeah, that's our background. But we're starting to see, okay, so for anyone who's from here, if you think higher education companies in Austin, what company do you think of?
What's from here?
Do you know? Like in Austin.
Do I count?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, Civitas,
That's what I
right?
was saying, yeah, Civitas.
Everybody knows Civitas. They're like, I feel like they're the only game in town for higher education. And it seems like anytime somebody develops something in higher education, they like absorb them. So they're great, and we love Civitas. There are a few other companies, and tomorrow night there's these new guys that just started called Pareto Technologies, and they have kind of like a data analytics tool that helps with student retention for higher education. But we're kind of agnostic to who's working on what. We're just kind of hopefully the place where they come together to find co-founders or find developers or find people who are working in the space.
And I'd go beyond that too. It's not just even K-12 and higher ed. I think really anything that hits in the learning technology space. We've worked with amazing companies like Aceable, for instance, which does great work in driver's ed, and they're going to be branching out into real estate licensing. Incredible company. Love that company. They're doing amazing.
Yeah.
And then other companies that maybe touch into the education marketplace. And even in business learning and some other companies. So really, the education and learning technologies and education innovation scene kind of is a pretty broad space, and so we like to say that we're our birth to life education innovation.
Two more young university or higher ed startups here are Schoollinks and Zinc-Up.
Okay.
More.
And I'll mention Upswing as well, which does more in junior college, but retention as well, college retention.
And Student Loan Genius.
Student Loan Genius, yeah, definitely. And then there's like fraternity sorority apps. There's a couple of those.
Really? That's off my radar.
Is there anything happening in sports or fitness?
Yeah, there's a couple. One is CoachTube. And Wade, I can't think of the other folks who are involved. That sounds right. But CoachTube, they have like a really cool platform. And then Aaron King, he does, I can't think of the name of his company, but he's awesome. And so yes, there are a couple, but I haven't heard of a ton.
There's a couple of fitness.
There's a bunch of like just more fitness apps. You said fitness and higher ed. I'm not sure.
Oh, no, not higher ed, but K through 12.
Yeah.
Okay, 12.
I would say CoachTube is the one that comes to mind, and then I'll remember Aaron's company.
There's the other one?
The Gray Matter. The guys that did the. I
don't think that's happening anymore.
Oh, okay.
But the Flowcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of sports, youth sports, live watch kind of thing.
Is that through like Flow Sports? Those same guys?
Same guys, yeah. Sorry, they used to be called Flowcast.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, my name's Daniel, and thanks for the presentation, all the information. That was great. And I wanted to ask, you mentioned that education used to be a little bit overlooked by tech a few years ago. So now that tech is disrupting more of education, is there anything within education that you see it being overlooked, say like special needs or public schools?
Analytics, K-12 data analytics. Huge open space that has yet to be fully exploited. It's happening in higher ed with like Civitas, but in the K-12 space, and it's tough in the K-12 space. Okay. That for sure, because of sort of privacy concerns and some other things. So some people have tried to enter into that, and there's some big players in that analytics market. But whenever I talk to any companies, you have to have some sort of data backing it, because that's really sort of where things connect for the people that are purchasing in that space. Is the bottom line. The challenge with the K-12 place not beyond the purchasing cycle, which is tough because it's like a full year to like start a deal and then get paid, right? And so it's like a really tough market, and that's what is challenging from an investment perspective as well in the education space, whether it's higher ed or K-12. But really the bottom line there is different because it's not in the consumer space, it's making money, and in the education space, it's getting results from students. And so if you're not connecting it somehow in that and showing people how it's connected through the data, or using the data to feed back information in some way, even if it's in athletics or sports, how is it working, how is it impacting their bottom line, then it can be a big challenge. But that's where I think the biggest market opportunity is still in K-12. I mean, the market is growing so big. I think it's up to like a $250 billion market in the U.S. alone, and spread stats that it's over like $2 trillion worldwide market. And so there's so much money in education that's sort of out there, and it's really just starting. And the projections are it'll just keep getting bigger investment. But
I would say, just to add to that, I would also, instead of looking at like where the opportunities are, look at where the incumbents have, like where they get their money from. So the Pearsons, McGraw-Hills, the big publishers, they still, it's crazy that in 2017, I have to say this, but they still make so much of their money on textbooks and assessments. That's a huge part of the spend from K-12 through higher ed. And so they're not, they're like these big giant, like just monoliths that don't want to move, and they like sink their teeth in. In fact, Caroline Joyner, who runs TechNet, she and I were talking, and this was before the 2017 session started, and there's this thing called like materials allotment for all public schools in Texas, and the big publishers are able to manipulate any bill that comes out that says like materials allotment spending needs to go to X, Y, and Z. They'll find a way to make X, Y, and Z be textbook. So it's just this weird, like the policy side of things is super important, and I think where startups do really well is when they can fit into areas where there is money allocated to it and they can kind of fit into the margins. But the bigger the companies get, the more they do in terms of lobbying and spending to make sure that bills are crafted so that they specifically get funded.
And that's just, the materials allotment is just starting. I think it was 3 years, maybe it was 4 years ago, they literally just started allowing software to be part of that materials allotment. Used to not be. But most of the textbook companies, the purchasing systems are so ingrained that they're set on hard goods. And so no one really uses textbooks anymore, but they still buy textbooks, and then we just put them in warehouses and don't use them, and then use the online version of the textbook that comes with the hard copy. And so that's another interesting space. But I would say, and this is kind of, I think, the impetus behind both EdTech Austin and EdTech Action is if you're looking to get into the education space, do your homework and figure out help work with educators and figure out what the problems are and start there. Like, what are the big problems that people are trying to solve? A lot of the education space are solutions looking for problems, and so don't be that guy. So,
yeah.
I have kind of a follow-up question. Do you see any appetite to make that sales cycle be any smaller? You mentioned how long it is to actually, even if you have a product with all the data behind it and get it into the right person's hands and get a check back. Is there any appetite that you've seen to shorten that sales cycle to see if there is an education institute out there that is interested in putting their toe in the water to say, oh, let me try this or let me try that? That seems like...
Yeah, I mean, it's for Texas at least, and most states, it's a state, you have state sort of systems, the way that that's run. I mean, the typical cycle is that budgets open, people, you start making those relationships sort of end of summer, July and August, budgets open up in October. They set budgets in like February, they get approved by boards in April, you get paid by June, right? And so it's like this weird cycle. There are some tricks in there on how to sort of get in the middle of that cycle or get paid in different ways, because there's, you know, like June's a great time because there's always like money they've got to spend before the budgets close. But yeah, it's a tough deal because it's policy and it's government, right? And so that's the challenge. Private, that's why a lot of people like working with private or charter schools, but you're just not going to get as big of a deals going with private and charter schools. But it's easier to get paid.
There's another idea though that's kind of related to that, which is with these ed clusters, these education clusters. This was a DOE program. Katrina Stevens, Joseph South, it was the director. I don't know with the Trump administration how that's changed. Like, it changes with every administration. It's not just Trump kicked them out or whatever. But Joseph South and Katrina Stevens were running the DOE's Office of EdTech, and they started this cluster concept. And along the way, it was basically like sharing best practices. Like, we had no idea these things were happening, but there's this really great concept called like a rapid cycle evaluation program. So actually the New York Department of Ed and iZone, they did this, and they've been doing it for a while, where if you're an education vendor and you want to start working with schools, you go through this program, and it's essentially a way to expedite like measuring the efficacy of those products in schools. So that way, if you run the program, you pilot it in a couple schools, you measure the impact, and then that way the New York Department of Ed can say, here is our findings about how this product or service works in schools. It's a really challenging environment to develop, because it has to be like statistically relevant and demographically relevant, all those things. But there are cases for it. I just don't know how prolific it is. I think there are pockets where it's happening, and that would certainly help, right? Like, if you, instead of having the traditional RFP process, if you could just say, we have this issue, here's this product, we know how effective it is, let's just start implementing it. Budget cycles notwithstanding, I guess. But so there's some things kind of happening that I feel like they're always getting better.
And while the budget's a challenge, the market, as I keep saying, is so ripe, there's so much money. I mean, in Texas alone, there's 5 million students, and that consumer base essentially gets refreshed every year. So you're always getting new crops of consumers entering into that marketplace, and so the potential there is really great if you're solving really important problems that, and you sort of bridge that gap between a nice to have sort of purchasing thing and a need to have, which right now that's where textbooks live, right? Is they become these need to haves, even though they don't really need them anymore.
Kind of follow up on the government side of things. Is there are there any EdTech groups that are developing relationships with House members or Senate members to try and rectify or allow schools, public schools, to benefit from this technology earlier than than otherwise would happen?
A couple of things. So actually, Governor Abbott has actually put aside a pretty huge fund for supporting technology, and everyone knows that this is a big missing component. There's the E-rate fund, which pays for a lot of infrastructure and capital costs for technology, which is a national thing, and it gets funded in the tunes of billions of dollars. So there's a lot of impetus around pushing different funding models through government and opening up different channels. Locally, the Austin Chamber of Commerce does a lot of work with a lot of different organizations around education. They have a yearly delegation. I think I went there in summer 2015 with them to support education and trying to work with some of those. But I mean, there's champions out there, but sadly, in our political climate, it gets sometimes lost in the den of things like voucher bills or bathroom bills and things. Same thing with he mentioned the education funding model. I mean, it's just messed up. I think we give like $500 million in Austin alone. We give like $500 million back to the state every year because we're a property-rich, student-poor district. Like, we've got a majority of low-income students, but our nice houses, when you go down to the hills, are so expensive. It kind of
Is it more an issue of raw funding or procedural friction when it comes to adopting stuff? Is it they just they don't have the money, they'd be willing to, or is it both?
No, the money is there.
Okay.
The money is there. It's really, it's again, I go back to it's really finding out what those big problems are and being in there. And so, the amount of money that's spent on software in schools is just increasing, on hardware as well. It keeps increasing year after year after year. And so it's just about getting in there. So the money is, the amount of money when you look at what's being spent in public education alone is just, it's staggering. And so to think that there isn't a market opportunity there, it would be crazy. There is. It's just finding the right piece of that market.
Well, and the other thing for, especially for K-12 funding, or finding those pockets, is following like what is assessed. That's a big part of it. If you're a school that has low, literacy rates for English, that's going to be a budget priority for the following year. How do we bring up those struggling readers? And so there will be a budget for a reading program, an iPad reading program or something like that. That's really important, and that's why it's actually really challenging, especially for teaching computer science. It's not technically a it's technically required by the state of Texas to offer it, but they don't actually. Just offering it doesn't mean they're actually going to teach it. It's crazy, but there's nothing on like the Texas standard state assessment includes computer science literacy. So the schools are really not that, they're not that apt to spend the money on that. In fact, they probably don't have as much of a budget for that as they do for math remediation or something like that.
But where some of the areas, and you had mentioned before, like what are the areas? Some of the areas where there is a lot of additional funding, especially when it comes to federal funding, and we'll see if that continues, is in areas like special ed, English language learners, career and technology education is huge. So while it's a weird thing, so while you can't do computer science, I think there's fewer than 600 actually certified computer science teachers in the entire state of Texas, if you can believe that. 90-something were certified last year. That's the entire state. Computer programming, it falls under career technology, so you can get additional funding to support a computer programming course. Which again, the nuances of that. And there's a bill now going through hopefully we'll get through the House this session, about sort of bridging that gap and making what they call technology applications, which is what computer science falls under, get the same kind of funding, additional funding. So there's additional funding sources and lots of grant funding to solve some of those big problems that we haven't been able to solve. So where software is really big is things like English language learning and credit recovery, which is what Compass Learning, which is now Edgenuity, bought by Edgenuity, where they live is in that credit recovery space, because these are things that just education has not been able to do. So they early on found these big problems and have sort of capitalized in those spaces. Special education is another one that uses a lot of technologies, and so it's finding those spaces and then being able to, for lack of a better word, exploit those market opportunities.
Aceable. That's why Aceable is such a brilliant model. It's required ed in Texas. So.
Yeah, and you can find markets like even like athletics. Everyone, Flowcasting, everyone films the athletics, and there's an amazing software called Huddle that'll let you like piece together your stuff, and it's huge, and it's a huge software. So there's these little niche markets within there as well, in the arts and in athletics and things like that as well. That again, there's so much money being spent on all of these things when you multiply it by the number of schools and students that are out there.
2 or 3 more questions? Any startup questions?
So if you have a consumer app and you're ready to launch to market, what's your main means of marketing that you're watching and making sure that they're working correctly? Like, how do you get word of mouth?
Am I you or am I me? in that question.
Here, you're neither one of us. You're a hypothetical tech company founder.
I'm going to say company founder. What am I looking at? Or am I investor? That's what I meant.
You're not an
founder or an investor?
You're the founder.
Founder? Actually, I don't know if the question should actually be any different, but what I look for as an investor, which is what I think you should look for as a founder, is repeat usage. I want to see that. So what I find everyone comes in and brings me is, look at all the downloads I got, or I got people to click, or sign up, or I have users. And those words, well, I know what they mean, but users doesn't really mean anything usually, and clicks and downloads don't really mean much to me. And somebody using something once doesn't really mean much to me. And mostly what I see is measurements of people using something once, so that doesn't mean much to me. And I would much rather see a small number of people using something a lot and getting a lot of value out of it than a lot of people using it once and getting no value out of it. Okay. And usually what I see is a lot of people using it once and getting no value out of it. It's like, look, we got all these people to try it. It's like, okay, you can sure do like search engine marketing, you know, like, or whatever you did to get those clicks, you know, like your marketing message works, but like, and that's part of it, you know, but like, but a lot of times where the rubber hits the road, it's like, well, we can't build anything that anyone will use, or they use it once or twice and then they stop, you know. So my first question is usually how many people have used it 3 times. Just give me an absolute number of how many people have used it 3 times, and a percentage then of like how many of all the people who have tried it, how many people have used it 3 times. There's all kinds of ways you could get more sophisticated, but that's a really easy starting point. That's like tells me like, is there anything there? The kind of thing I find with this was like a consumer. That was consumer, right?
Yeah.
So with a consumer type app, the other thing I've learned to look for, and I don't really consider myself a very strong consumer investor. I've got friends who are. I watch them and I see what they invest in. And I watch what kind of questions they ask and what they look for. What I've learned is there is a vocabulary for consumer startups. I'm more of a SaaS guy, but there's a vocabulary, and so SaaS metrics are like, you know, CAC and LTV and like things like that. Not that those aren't consumer metrics, but consumer metrics tend to be more at this stage because you're not making money. They tend to be more monthly active users, daily active users, different types of engagement, different types of virality measure, you know, viral coefficients, things that say it's working. And again, I'm much more concerned with, 100 people that you don't know is a good enough sample. Like, it doesn't have to be a lot of people. If like, out of 100 people, 25 of them really, really like it, and then I can believe that there's more than 100 of those people, you know, like, that's a really good start.
Do you share much on what you see as the common pitfalls for startups publicly, and or anything like maybe anonymized postmortems for startups that didn't quite go as well?
We've worked with a lot of startups, so that's a pretty broad question. I could spend the rest of the night answering, you know, giving you examples or saying those. But just just 1 or 2 quick ones that come to mind, not necessarily the best ones. But yeah, I think, you know, a really common problem on either side, whether you're technical or you're not technical, is to look at the other side and think, well, my part's the hard part, their part's easy. And that's just really, really common. Or like, oh yeah, like we're just gonna build it, and then like, oh, then we just sell it. You know, like, oh yeah, once we build it, you know, like, we know how to build it, so then we just sell it, like as if that just happens, you know, like, or the other side of it, like, oh, like you know, we're just gonna have them build this thing that's better than Facebook's thing. Then we're gonna go do this. Like, yeah, it's really hard to build something better than Facebook's thing. So that's one.
I was wanting to see, like, do you have meetings where that specifically is taught for the whole hour, or do you have resources like that on the webpage that goes with it? Because I know like right now it's not.
Yeah. You know, there's every day here there's meetups and events going on where people talk about some of those things. And some of the best ones are just what I call founder stories. Like there's a meetup called Startup Grind that does that. And there's lots of other times where that'll happen, where somebody gets up and just basically tells stories about starting a company. And that's one good way to do that. Another great way is just through personal one-on-one interactions. And that's really what a big part of what mentoring or office hours is about, both here and I think at other places too. And so that's a big reason why you might become a member and get on the office hours calendar and go talk with a whole bunch of other people about what you're working on and try to get kind of more specific feedback and their stories.
Thanks.
Did you have any statistics on how long startups survive after going through your accelerator program?
Statistics of how long? I don't know. That's not exactly those statistics of how long they survive. The first one we invested in is still going.
Oh yeah.
But lots of other ones aren't. And so let's see.
Because you're very selective, right?
So yeah, I just don't know that I have exactly the number in the format of exactly what you said. But so if I know we were just answering this for Fund 4, of all the companies we've invested in, which is not exactly the same as the companies that have gone through the accelerator, which was like how many companies are in Fund 4? Like
120,
20?
something like that.
And so of those 120, 60 of those companies, so half of them, have had up rounds, which doesn't mean even more than them have raised money, but that means they've raised money at a higher valuation than at what we invested in it. And there have been 89 up rounds, so some of them had more than one up round.
Okay.
That gives you some. That's just a number I have that I know is right.
That's what they got.
Yeah.
There are 50 states.
With hundreds of them, it is very hard to keep track of all of this. Actually, honestly, is the biggest thing. Like you ask that question, like we should just know it, and like it's actually, as a region knows, it's very hard to keep track of what they're all doing and exactly, give you a very specific answer for that. But that's one we have. We recently tried to count.
Cool.
Cool. Well, I think that's probably a good spot to wrap it at. I want to just introduce a couple more people before we walk out towards the kitchen, so there's other people to chat with too. So Nick is took my class at UT a long time ago. That's when I first met him, and he's worked at a bunch of different tech startups here in town, including recently he was at Favor for a while. And he is now a startup champion here, which basically means his job is to work with the startups that work here in our accelerator and help make sure they get plugged into all the opportunities to speak at things, to meet customers, to talk to investors, things like that happen here. Areej is one of our venture associates, and she in particular has really helped to manage and track our Fund 4, and so she knows a lot about us investing in things like that. Manuela is in the back, and she works with Liz on our experience team and helps make this an awesome place to work. And so she knows a lot about working here. Who else? I see Paula. Paula is our accelerator coordinator, and so she knows a lot about how the accelerator works. We just changed how it all works, so it'll be quite a test if you go ask her a bunch of questions to see if she can answer them, because the answers kind of changed week to week right now. But no, it's those are some other people that you might want to talk to as we go. So thank you all for coming, and I'm going to walk out here to the left and into the kitchen, and you're welcome to follow me. And I think there's food and drinks there, and we'll talk more if you want. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
It never used to work. I don't have a card actually. Did you? I had my last slide up. Yeah, I can just give you. Yeah, that's perfect. Just send me an email.
Is there any upcoming events?
Tomorrow night here, 6:30. There's going to be we have 350 RSVPs right now. I have no idea how many people will actually show up, but more than we normally do. So I definitely check that out.
I was really interested in you guys being here. One of my first startups was a coaching company. We were going to go into tutoring and combine them.
Yeah.
We actually had Stanford run this program, but there's this weird issue where there's all this huge
Really?
Stanford. And there's all this university hours. And through this tendency to Stanford has gave them all the facilities where you get all these coaches and tutors. And they use sports and keeping kids fit and healthy makes them socially socially.
Actually, hey, will you let me grab these chairs and walk out? What happened? Why is it still around? Or?
Are you up here? Well, this guy is here. I'm here to see him.
Well, yeah, why don't we just get you 30 minutes to look at it and maybe talk a little bit deeper about how you're looking to connect. What is it like?
Rudy.
Rudy?